The first line in Scott Peck's book, The Road Less Travelled, is "Life is hard," which is an easy first line to remember. It's not a bad line to start off a book on psychotherapy about, although it does tend to be off-putting, or it can be off-putting. I lent a copy to one lady once, and she never got past the first sentence. So she just gave it back to me the next week and said, I didn't like the first sentence. And I can understand that, because hard stuff, by definition, because it is hard, is hard. Hard is hard. Hard stuff is difficult. So of course that's off-putting, because no one likes difficult stuff. No one likes hard stuff. We all like the easy stuff. We're all the same in that way. But we could say that there's two different types of hard, two different types of difficult. And these two types are very much different things. So the first type of hard or difficult is kind of like where Sisyphus rolls the big boulder up to the top of the hill. This is a really good metaphor. It's hard work all the way. You're rolling the stone up and up and up, and the more you roll it, the harder it's getting, and the sweat's pouring off you, and the sun's really hot, and it doesn't get easier, it gets harder because you get more tired. And there's no relief when you get to the top, because you have to do it all over again, start from scratch all over again, and that's it. Ad infinitum. Hard work, nothing coming back to you apart from pain, frustration, anguish, and stuff like that. So that's one type of hard. And it's a type of hard, it makes sense not to get involved in too much, because it's sterile, it's futile difficulty. And the other type of hard, which is more applicable to what I think Scott Peck was talking about in the psychotherapy realm of things, it's hard, but not in that same way. So it's kind of hard in a way that when you jump into the sea and it's really cold, that's hard, but once you're in it, there's a good side to it. We can enjoy it. In other words, once we go over a threshold or a lip or something like that, something is coming back to us. We're getting stuff given back to us, energy, inspiration, interest, motivation, excitement, all that kind of stuff. So despite the fact that it is hard in one sense, it's counterbalanced by the energy life gives us the energy we need to do it, and it actually is life. So that actually is life. It's life, because life only is life when we make that kind of particular type of effort, which isn't normal effort. It's not what we mean normally by effort. It's not goal-orientated effort. It's not straining for a result, and then we think when we get the result, it's going to be the end justifies the means, and we're going to feel good. That's just mechanical existence, and it's a con. But it's a type of hard in that when we do actually engage in it, life engages with us. So it's a two-way thing. So we can't really say it's hard at all, because it isn't hard. It's just life. And unless we engage in life, it isn't. It doesn't give us anything. So unless we engage in life, it isn't life. It doesn't work like that. It's not just that I sit back passively as if I'm listening to a podcast or whatever, and life just happens. Which is the big illusion of our time. We might even go so far as to say that life can be passively absorbed. It's kind of the great myth of our era. And then if life doesn't come our way, we complain. What's happening? Life isn't coming my way, or it's not happening. Because we think it ought to, because we're entitled in that way. We think life ought to happen to us. We just have to sit back and get cross if it doesn't happen to us, which is pretty funny when you think about it. So really it's not hardness, it's just life. And this is reflected by the line in the Tao Te Ching where it says, and I can't quote exactly, but it says you can't touch it, see it, smell it, or taste it. But when you use it, it's inexhaustible. So that's the Tao they're talking about. There's no limits. The more you engage in it, the more resources you have to engage, so to speak. And so it is essentially a two-way thing. Now that is also inherent in the particular line from Psalms, and I can't remember where exactly it comes, but the line is, if thou wouldst know how to suffer, you would not have to suffer. And another line, which is, again, from a Taoist sage, who says, a sage meets with no difficulty. The reason a sage meets with no difficulty is because he is alive to all difficulties. He's engaged in it. Therefore, it's not a difficulty, it's something else. So what else is it, we might say? Well, it's life. That's what it is. It's life. Not a difficulty, it's life. And it is counterbalanced because, okay, so there could be difficult stuff in it, but when we engage in it, that's balanced. We get something back from it. Even though it's a cliche, we have the inner strength to do whatever it is. And if we're being totally passive, that also includes relying totally on tricks. Like if I do this trick, then the good things will happen. But that's not engaging with life. That's trying to be on the outside of life, looking in, but do the clever tricks which will bring about the result. So that's passive. So what we're really saying here is that the precise nature of the difficulty comes in when we're dealing with life on the basis of our thoughts, on the basis of who we think we are. And we're reluctant to let go of that and actually engage in life directly, which cannot be done on the basis of who we think we are. It has to be, we have to extend ourselves, as Scott Peck says. We have to leave ourselves behind to engage. We have to reach out. So our problem is, therefore, drawing everything together, all the things that I've just said, is that we want to have life, but we don't want to extend ourselves. In other words, we don't want to let our idea of who we are, we don't want to let go of that idea. We want to have that idea and yet live. That's our position, and we're kind of very stubborn about it. Stubborn is, in fact, an entirely inadequate word for our attitude in this. Stubborn doesn't come anywhere near describing it. And so it can be seen that in this case, our infinite stubbornness isn't really doing us any favours, because whatever we're going to get as a result of it isn't life. So if I'm just passively letting it happening and saying, well, I might participate if it's, it turns out to be good enough, or I like it, or it's what I expect it to be, and until then I won't. I'll just be waiting, playing the waiting game, waiting for the good stuff to happen, because then I'll engage in it, because I like the good stuff, so then I'll be having fun, being creative, and letting my hair down if I had any hair, letting my hair down. But really, that's a disguised way of just wanting to hang on to our idea of what the world is, what good things can come out of the world, what bad things can come out of the world, who I am, what life is supposed to be, all this kind of morass of ideas I don't want to let go. And yet I want to live. Because if I didn't live, what would I be doing? What's the alternative to living? So that's a good question. If I'm just passively identified with my ideas of everything, myself and everything else, waiting for life to happen, trying to press the right buttons, doing the right things, jumping through the right hoops, conforming to whatever social requirements they are, and then thinking, well, now life is going to happen, right? It's going to happen, isn't it? Because I did all the things. It's going to happen. So in that case, it is something's happening. Only not, well, something seems to happen, but it's not life. So the question that I was just trying to come around to is, there is something else instead of life that happens in that case. It isn't life, though. It's a wearisome thing. It's a kind of a thing with no life in it. Life with no life in it. It's the simulation of life, the analogue of life, the mind-created version of life. Which is, and another way of talking about that is to say it's the waiting game. I'm playing the waiting game. As long as I'm identified with my idea of myself and my beliefs about the world, I am inevitably playing the waiting game. And the waiting game has nothing to do with life, because life isn't something you wait for or play for, as James Carr says. James Carr says, because we are finite players, because we're acting out of the rational mind, we are playing to live, because we believe that if we win in our playing, then we get to live. That's the only, so we keep on playing and playing and playing, and we get very tricky and very sneaky and competitive and all of that, because we think honestly, we honestly think that if we learn to play the game well enough, then life will happen. The prize is life. The prize, success, winning at the game, the prize is life. Only that's not true. So that there is the number one con, the big con. And we're just about as far away from seeing the con as we ever could be far away from anything. Because the bottom line is that no matter how long you play, how good you are at playing, life is not going to happen. There's always going to be another hurdle. There's always going to be another thing to work through. And in fact, the more we get invested in our playing, which equals the thinking mind, which equals our finite games, the less willing on a very fundamental level we are to actually engage with life. So the cleverer we are at playing the game, the smarter we are in that intellectual sense, the less engaged in life we are. And so what happens to us isn't life, it's the simulation of life, which is entirely sterile. It's sterile because it's a waiting game, and what we're waiting for never happens. So does that sound like much fun? Rhetorically speaking, rhetorically asking the question, no, not really. It doesn't sound like a hell of a fun. I've heard of things that do sound like more fun than that. So the idea doesn't really appeal, does it? I mean, clearly it doesn't appeal. Playing the waiting game for something is kind of like Miss Havisham in Great Expectations. She's sitting there with her wedding dress that's covered in cobwebs, so many decades on. And that's all of us, just as long as we're trying to live life on the basis of the thinking mind or of our ideas, which is never, 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 never life. So the difficulty, where the difficulty comes in, is actually letting go. The letting go isn't hard in the sense of rolling a boulder up a hill. Letting go is just letting go. The second we let go, there's no boulder to be pushing or pulling. We've let go of it. So in that sense, it is not hard, it is not difficult, it does not work. In the sense that constantly playing a finite game is work, because you're trying to get the outcome to happen. So another way of saying this would be to say something like, when we are operating on the basis of our thoughts about the world, then the type of freedom we have is the freedom of samsara, which is a kind of a weird mutant variant of freedom. The freedom of samsara is to go along with whatever illusions we want to, believing whatever illusions we want to. There's nothing barred, no holds barred. It's all yours. Whatever illusion you want, you can have it. You can go with it. Absolutely unfettered freedom to be deluded. And that's a type of a freedom, and there's no work in it because the illusions work through us. And they run the show. We just think we're a part of it. We think we're actually living. But that's not the case in the simulation of life, because it's only simulated life. It's only the simulation of living. And we're only the simulation of who we are, etc. Now, using the word samsara doesn't necessarily mean we automatically have to buy into Eastern metaphysics. We could equally well talk about hyper-reality. It's exactly the same thing. So we could talk about the ease of hyper-reality, the ease of the hyper-real. Now, the hyper-real is an ongoing torment because it is another way of talking about the waiting game, but there's an ease to it. There's an ease to it because we don't ever have to let go of our ideas of things. And that goes without saying, because the hyper-real is our ideas about things. That's it in a nutshell. That's what hyper-reality is. It's our ideas about existence. So that may not sound like the proper definition of hyper-reality. More technically, I suppose it's like Baudrillard says, we have symbolic representations of the world, because that's what we do. We represent the world in symbolic fashion with symbols. That's what symbols are for, to represent stuff without being the thing themselves. And that's fine, but then what happens is there's a short circuit takes place, and we relate to the symbols as if they are the thing they are representing. And that's the more rigorous definition of hyperreality. There's a short circuit. We don't have to engage in reality. We just engage with our thoughts about reality. And it's not as if I am engaging with my thoughts about reality, because I am not there. Only my idea of myself is there, my thoughts of myself, and my thoughts of myself are engaging with other thoughts. That's what's going on in hyperreality. Now, that's the same thing as saying we're living in the world of our thoughts, because all a thought is a representation, pure and simple. Every thought is a representation of something that isn't it, supposedly. But actually, in the everyday state of being in which we all find ourselves, the thoughts have substituted themselves for what they're supposedly, and they're not actually. There isn't actually any correspondence between our thoughts and reality at all, simply because reality cannot be represented in some abstract or formalized kind of way. So reality is, like Robert Anton Wilson says, the only thing equal to the universe is the universe. If it's anything else that isn't the universe, it's not the universe. It can't represent the universe. It can in a tokenistic way, but not in any way that can give us any actual insight to the universe. So what this comes down to is that there is a great ease in hyperreality. And when we get totally habituated to it, as we are totally habituated to it, as a fish is habituated to water, we're a hyperreal fish in a hyperreal sea. And then actually having to let go of all that shit and engage directly with reality without thought as the middleman, without the conceptual mediation that we're so addicted to, that's hard. So then it's like, oh, life is hard. It's not just hard, it's impossible when we try to live life in a conceptually mediated way. So from that point of view, yes, life is hard. but not hard in the way that we think it is. It's a totally different way of being hard. So samsara, or the hyperreal, is equivalent to what I was referring to as the wide gate. The wide gate means anything goes. So from the point of view of the self-image or the self-concept idea of ourselves, there's so many possibilities out there. I could do anything, be anything. The world is my oyster. Only it isn't really. It looks really, really wide. But it isn't, because none of that stuff is real, because the self-concept isn't real. So that's hyper-reality. Now the other side of it is the narrow gate, and it's extraordinarily narrow. You're talking about camels here, and needles, and the eyes of needles. You're talking about a very narrow gate. And the reason it's narrow is because that very particular camel, known as a self-image, cannot fit through it. We have to leave it behind. We have to leave that baggage behind. Then we have freedom. Unconditioned freedom, rather than the freedom of samsara, or the freedom of the hyperreal. Okay, thanks for watching.